Setting the record straight is not always a comfortable place to be. In fact, it often means standing in the eye of the storm, speaking truth where silence might be safer. But it also is a position of privilege to have the tools, the platform, the clarity to challenge distortion and reclaim what is true. With privilege comes great responsibility. 2 weeks ago, the world watched a moment that was as surreal as it was triggering. A meeting between USA President Donald Trump and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. And while diplomacy was on the agenda, what echoed louder were Trump's continued remarks about an alleged white genocide in South Africa, a dangerous fiction, a rewriting of history that seeks to mask centuries of pain with a single false narrative, followed by the policies that he's created for the white farmers that are fleeing South Africa. As a Black South African, watching that unfold was more than upsetting. It was a deep and familiar ache, and it made me think about the power of storytelling, of film, in setting the record straight. And that brings me to filmmaker and writer Vusi Africa. I first encountered Vusi at this year's Joburg Film Festival, held in March at the Sandton Convention Center. This year's festival was smaller, more intimate, perhaps a sign of the economic times. But in that simplicity, something more powerful emerged. And I'll talk about it later. The Joburg Film Festival, founded in 2016 by Native Yards, remains a vital space, a celebration of African storytelling, industry growth, and innovation. What I treasure most about it is the fact that it connects the audiences to the quiet brilliance of young Black local filmmakers whose work may not always hit the mainstream or be commercial, but young Black local filmmakers who are telling the stories that must be told. Vusi Africa is undoubtedly one of these storytellers. His latest film, Happy, the true story of Happy Sindane, is a courageous act of reclamation. It revisits and reclaims the complex, painful, and often misunderstood life of his late cousin, Happy Sindane. Even the title whispers a correction, the true story. A quiet challenge to the headlines and sound bites that shaped Happy's image in the public eye. I'll admit, I almost didn't watch this film. Let me explain myself. Happy Sindane's story is not an easy one. It's a tragedy. I didn't want to revisit those emotions that you feel when you're listening to his story. It's a tragedy wrapped in racial confusion and public spectacle. A young man appearing out of nowhere in the early 2000s, claiming to be a white child abducted and raised by Black people. The country was conflicted when the story came out. The media pounced, and the narrative quickly spiraled into something so dangerous. But after hearing Vusi speak on one of the panels at the Joburg Film Festival, I knew I had to watch the film. I could see that he wasn't just telling a story. He was undoing a story. You see, Vusi grew up in the Sindane household. He watched the media turn his grandfather, a man who took in and raised Happy, into a villain. All because the country could not process the image of a black family being the caretakers of a boy who looked white, a boy who longed so desperately to be white. And once Happy was confirmed not to be white, the media abandoned the story altogether. The spectacle had ended. The humanity of Happy and the Sindanes had never really mattered. It was the sensation. Vusi, now armed with a camera and a conscience, returns to the public of South Africa. He almost asks us for a family meeting. And he asks the questions that the media failed to ask. Chief among those questions, had the Sindanes been a white family raising a black child, would the media have turned them into villains? The answer quite clearly is no. And so the film becomes both a memoir and some sort of reckoning. It is his love letter to his imperfect grandfather, a flawed cousin, Uhebi, and a country still haunted by the ghost of its racial past. The filmmaker steps into the story not just as a filmmaker, but as a witness. And that makes his perspective both intimate and urgent. The film was Vusi's master's project at AFDA, but it is so much more than an academic exercise. It is a powerful counter-narrative to the media's original telling, a careful revisiting of memory, an undoing of grief and inherited pain. In a recent Newsroom Africa interview, Vusi admitted that making this film came with an ethical dilemma. He is both a participant and a storyteller. But rather than hide from that, he leans to it, understanding that his closeness to the subject gives him not just authority, but responsibility. He is responsible for the legacy of his grandfather and the legacy of his cousin. The same responsibility we carry when we challenge misrepresentation about our country on global stages. Because the parallels are chilling, if we take a step back for a moment, we can draw a clear line between the media's sensational treatment of Happy's story and the dangerous racial propaganda pushed by figures like Donald Trump. His persistent lie about a so-called white genocide in South Africa is not just factually incorrect, it is part of a broader, calculated distortion, a tool of white supremacy. This is the very propaganda that groups like AfriForum use to fuel fear, garner sympathy, and whitewash a history of oppression. And it's not just local, it's global. Our children are growing up in a world where these lies are dressed as truth. If we do not counter them, we risk the slow erosion of memory, our memory. We risk becoming the villains in our own story. At the Joburg Film Festival panel, Vusi spoke of this gender with clarity. He reminded us that filmmakers have a moral imperative, not just to entertain, but to bear witness, to challenge this erasure, to bring dignity to the forgotten, and to bring complexities to the misunderstood. He called on filmmakers to stand firm, to tap into funding, to tell the harder stories, to preserve the truth. His documentary about his cousin does just that. It refuses to reduce South Africa to a land of either post-racial harmony or racial vengeance. It wrestles with abandonment, identity loss, identity complexity, legacy, and the role of media in shaping or shattering lives and narratives. What Vusi's film teaches us is that cinema can be a kind of justice, a way of restoring humanity where it has been stripped away. When we tell our stories fully, honestly, and without apology, we don't just correct the past, we protect the future. In this strange world we live in, where groups of Afrikaners can flee the country claiming victimhood, where the President of the United States can fabricate a genocide, and where Black people who reconciled, forgave, and tried to rebuild are cast once again as the villains. The only weapon we have is the truth. In a recent writing lab I led, I consulted for a young woman whose work is deeply concerned with memory loss and future mapping. I found it courageous of her. The story is political and radical. I was incredibly encouraged to see this. I went on to a formal platform to project that in light of Trump and Elon Musk's obsession of rewriting our story, our history as South Africans, we are going to see a lot of nostalgic and reflective scripts come out of South Africa. Suddenly, we will realize that we cannot take it for granted that people know that Afrikaners were the real villains. No, we can't take that for granted. So, if you are a filmmaker, you are in a position of privilege. The privilege to record, to reflect, to reveal. And with that comes great responsibility. We need you to set the record straight before someone else writes the ending of our story.
So yes, there is an urgent need for us to reassume our position as storytellers. Take over the autonomy, right? It is difficult to make these type of films, but trust me, these are the only films that the world wants to see. These are the films that are going to do well, because these are the films that carry our hope, that carry who we are, that carry our history, and that drive us on as a nation to move forward and continue remembering, and with remembering, not to commit the same mistakes of the past. Because now there is a call for some certain independent state, which is propaganda, for me, because we are right back at the perpetuation of the Bantu stance of separate governance. That is taking us 45 years back. We cannot allow that in a democratic South Africa where we as filmmakers have funding from the Gauteng Film Commission, we have funding from the ECDC, we have funding from the KZN Film Commission, we have funding from the National Film and Video Foundation, we have funding from the IDC, we have funding from the DTIC. How do we allow such a thing to happen and then we let our voices go, ma?